What's up, guys? Welcome to this Galentines cake tutorial for beginners because let's be honest, I am a beginner when it comes to piping. I ended up getting these silicone heart pans off of Amazon. I'll put a link in the description. I was kind of worried how they would do because they felt a little flimsy, but they actually baked up really well. There they are, fresh out of the oven, after they cooled, of course. And then I just leveled it while it was still in the pan. And then I cut each of those in half, and I ended up only using 3 of the layers. I did not want this cake to be way too tall. So here are the 3 layers, and I ended up wrapping them in plastic wrap, and I popped them in the freezer for like 30 minutes just so they're nice and firm before icing. As always, I add some buttercream to my cake board, and this is just so that when I put my cake layer down, my cake is not going to be sliding around at all. It's going to stay in place thanks to that buttercream. And this red velvet cake was actually gluten-free red velvet cake as requested by my client, and it came out really, really good. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going to take some regular vanilla buttercream and I put it in a piping bag, and then I'm just going to pipe a dam on top of the cake layer, and this is just so that my filling, in case it's a little bit looser than my normal buttercream, it's not going to come out of the sides, it's not going to make any bulging. So that's just what the dam helps with. So after that, I just use my offset spatula and I'll just smooth out the filling so that it's kind of flat for when I'm going to add my next cake layer. And it's pretty repetitive. You kind of just put your cake layer, your dam, your filling, cake layer, dam, filling, etc. until you have as many layers as you'd like. Please enjoy the soothing music as you watch along as I work on this cake, and then I'll pop back in for the next set of instructions. Now that the cake is all put together, the 3 layers of cake, 2 layers of filling, I'm just adding some vanilla buttercream to the bottom of this cake. And actually, I recorded me frosting this entire cake. And when I was done, I checked my phone and my phone had died. So I'm so sorry that I don't have the rest of that here on this video, but it's basically just me covering this cake with some vanilla buttercream, and this is what it looks like. So this is the thick crumb coat. Pop it in the fridge, and once it's firm, you're ready to go with your next layer of buttercream, which I'm using a light pink buttercream here. This is going to be the base color of this heart-shaped cake. I'm using a large offset spatula, and then once I apply my buttercream, I'll switch over to the smooth cake comb from EsterCakes. I'll put a link in the description as well. I really love these cake combs because they're so nice and tall, which is perfect for really tall cakes. My client wanted a lot of edible glitter, so I will be using this Rose Gold Treasure. This is by Shine Dessert Glitter. I'll put a link in the description also. I'm just spraying the top of it, and even though this was rose gold, it actually worked out really well. I didn't feel like a white diamond or a silver spray would look very good on top of the pink. It would probably take away from the pink, and actually this rose gold enhanced that pink. I will be using the same color pink buttercream in this piping tip. You can either use a Wilton 6B or a Wilton tip number 32. And here goes my warning. Like I said, I've only done a handful of piped cakes in my entire career of making cakes. Anyone that knows me knows I'm a fondant girl. I really don't do piping, but every once in a while I will. So as you can see here, I'm doing one continuous piping, but I've done a few since then. And I've realized that I prefer to lift up the piping bag, drag it down, stop, lift up the piping bag again, and repeat instead of doing one continuous motion. But I mean, it looks fine. This handy little tool I found on Amazon, I will also link this in the description. This is a little marker for where your swags will be, and it's adjustable. So you just adjust it to kind of the size you want. I made mine to where I can hold it above the piping and it's not going to affect the piping at all. I just really needed those lines on the cake so I knew where to make these swags. It just makes it a lot easier for me. So once I lined it up, I just like to start at the front and start marking. Kind of make sure to hold it level the same time that you press it. It ended up being very helpful and I think they were pretty cheap. So go snag a few. The next piping tip I'm using is a closed star. I believe this may be piping tip number 25. And again, it's the same light pink colored buttercream. And I'm just doing like a back and forth motion here. I really like the location of this piping. I like that it's right underneath that big piping. It's a different type of piping tip, so it has a different look to it. If you mess up that large piping at all, this kind of just hides any imperfections. You can also do this on the very top of the cake on the opposite side of the large piping, but me, I had the edible glitter on top and I really didn't want to mess up because that glitter's there. So this next piping tip I'm using is another closed star, but it has more teeth than the last one did. This piping tip doesn't actually have a number on it, but I believe it's equivalent to an Ateco 30. So you can use something similar, or you can just use the same piping tip that you used prior to this one. So this angle is quite hard for me. I'm not really used to it, so I guess this would be where practice makes perfect. But in my case, obviously not perfect, but it gets better the more and more I practice. I'm just following those little indentations that I have just to guide me of where to put my piping. You can also use a leaf piping tip here and do the same motion back and forth, and it ends up looking really good. I believe that is piping tip number 352. See if you can find that. Or if you just search online for a leaf piping tip, you can just see what pops up. Next, I'll be using a white buttercream with a round piping tip, and this is piping tip number 5. I don't know the official term, but it's somewhat of a pearl border where I just kind of pipe a dot and drag it, and it's always rough for me starting off. But then the more I do it, I get the hang of it. It's a nice contrast of having the white against the pink. I really enjoyed that. So as someone that is not good at piping, I would have to say this piping here on this cake is probably the hardest. It seems like it would be the easiest because they're just little dots that you drag, but for me, it was the hardest. It might have something to do with buttercream consistency, but I'm not a piper, so I really don't know. Okay, thankfully that white piping is done, so we can do the border piping on the very bottom of the cake, and I just used the same piping tip that I used on the top of the cake. You can use something smaller if you like, but I do like the bigger piping tips for the top and the bottom. Okay, now I'm just switching out the piping tip on the white buttercream to a smaller closed star piping tip. There's no actual number on this tip, but I would say it's equivalent to a Wilton tip number 35. And I'm just going to be making a smaller border right on top of that thick border at the bottom. Okay, finally I'm done with piping, thank God. For the words onto the top of the cake, I knew I was not going to pipe it as I'm not great at piping, so fondant it is, and I'm writing for the girls. This mold can be found on Amazon. I originally got it at Michael's way back in the day. I think it's a Martha Stewart. I'm just using some white gum paste to fill the molds. You can also use fondant, just make sure you have enough Tylose powder in your fondant to make it firmer. That way they're not hard to pull out of the mold after you get them in there. I let the letters dry, and then after they were dry, I picked them up with a tweezer and I placed them on the cake first just to make sure everything looked really good and I liked the placement. And then I went back in and I added my edible glue to glue them to the cake. And look at how pretty it came out. It's so sparkly, and for me not being really good at piping, this came out so cute. So there you have it, guys. If I can do it, you can do it too. Thanks for watching.